For sure we got it. You like politics, promise we got it. Report everything hot at this college. PG News, yeah, right off the press. Reporters and filmers, PG got the best. Information that you need is reported. Make sure y'all tune in for what's happening next.
Hey, welcome to PGCC Perspective, brought to you by the illustrious Alston newspaper. I'm your host, Mattia, giving you the latest on all things political, platonic, and problematic. Happy Black History Month, Owls. And as we begin to wrap up this commemorative theme of Black excellence, power, and resilience, we have to also acknowledge that despite the hard work of our ancestors, the work is still not done. So today's podcast is going to be a little bit on the heavier side, just to give you guys a quick little trigger warning. But I'm so glad that we're having this conversation and that I will be joined by special guests. So whenever you guys are ready, go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Hello, Owlsters. My name's Kayce Munyeneh. I'm the mayor for the town of Cheverly.
Hi guys, my name is Alexis Edgley. I am a writer and content creator on the Owl newspaper.
Hello, my name is Harris Mancho, and I am a writer on the Owls newspaper.
Nice. So can we get started by telling you guys, so obviously this conversation is about policing in America, which affects not only the Black community, but a lot of other people as well. Can you guys just let me know, like, what's your role or what's your stance on policing in America currently?
Well, I'll start there. First, let me just make sure I do this quick disclaimer. I'm the mayor for the town of Cheverly, but my views and my thoughts are my own, so I don't represent what my town thinks. That 7,000 people would be really hard to do. And I have a couple of roles and hands when it comes to policing in America. One is I spent almost 15 years working for the Metropolitan Police Department in the Victim Services branch, and really sat side by side with law enforcement officers and prosecutors and worked in the criminal justice system. The other part to that is I am essentially the chief executive officer for my town, which means I have a chief of police and an entire police department that I'm responsible for. Which means we have to make sure that they are doing the job that they're supposed to be doing. So that's my connection to policing today.
All right. Sorry. Could you repeat the question, Mattia?
Yeah. So what's your stance on policing in America today?
Honestly, I feel like my stance became what it is in 2020. Definitely the George Floyd murder. That was something that impacted me a lot. I think prior to then, while I did understand that there was a lot of horrific acts being done by the police, I suppose I didn't pay attention to it the way I feel like I should have. And after that year, I couldn't not see it. It was like every other month someone was being killed by the cops. And then on top of that, people were like, we want justice, and it wasn't happening. So I suppose right now I feel a bit frustrated.
I believe there needs to be some sort of selflessness built in police officers. I think there needs to be another talk about what their job is for. You know, what police officers are supposed to be doing and what they are assigned to do for the people in the community. I think there needs to be a focus on trust between officers and the people in the community, so there won't be as much conflictions as they are right now.
I felt that. I know for me, I'm kind of not really indifferent. I'm just frustrated. I'm really tired of the way our system has continued to disregard social issues that continuously affects America, and especially Black America in general. I think being Black in America is one of the most dangerous things that somebody could do. And so I really hope that this conversation will help shed light, possibly discuss ways to mend broken trust within the community. And so my question for you guys is how has your upbringing influenced your view on the police?
Oh, okay, I can go first. I think that's a really great question, first of all. And I'm going to be honest, I think the biggest thing that I miss growing up is that my parents never sat me down and we never had the police talk or the cop talk, what would happen if you got pulled over. I brought this up with my mom not too long ago. She was like, well, I never had it, and I would see that depicted throughout media, and I was like, well, what is this all about? And the older I got, the more aware I became of kind of the conversation some Black parents will have with their kids about, now if you do get pulled over, here's how to get out of that situation without being harmed or, and God forbid, killed, you don't make it home. And I think because of the way I grew up, I was kind of shielded from that in a sense. And then social media brought to light what was going on.
Definitely. I think for me, like, police, I've always grown up to, like, respect them and, like, understand that they're, like, designed to protect us, especially because my dad was a military police officer in the military. So I grew up with that ideology, like, these people are here to protect you, they're not here to hurt you. So I think the first account of police brutality that I witnessed, not actually within police, but like law enforcement officers, even security, was like George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin in 2012. And I was 7 years old when I heard about that. And that was the first time that, like, my sense of security and our law enforcement kind of just exploded. I was like, I don't know who to trust. I don't know who to go to. And I don't know if they did this in you guys' schools, but, like, for mine, they noticed that, like, 7-year-olds were being exposed or, like, overexposed to violence in our community, like, happening with Black people. So they would bring in police officers every other week to sit down and talk to us, ask us, like, do you guys have any questions for us? And everybody was just terrified. And I think that was my first real, like, recollection of, like, realizing, okay, these people, or, like, these figures that we're, like, told we have to respect, they're human too, and they're capable of doing, like, human things,
So I'd like to, if I could circle back to your first question, because my answer was more of a connection to policing versus how I view policing in America today, and then finish up with your second question. The reality is we need policing. There are bad actors in the world, and we need to make sure that we keep society safe. But because of the inherent, for lack of a better word, the inherent systemic white supremacy that is the very foundation of our country, policing was birthed out of that. And so until there's an upheaval of the entire system, it will not actually ever serve its people for what it's supposed to do. So that's sort of my view of policing in general. When I think about how I was reared in my experiences as a child and how that makes me look at the police, I had a myriad of them. So I'm able to sort of look at them in different ways. So I grew up, my parents I lived in a very well-to-do community. My parents got divorced. We moved to a very rural area in Florence, South Carolina, and my next door neighbor was both the sheriff and a member of the Klan.
Oh, wow.
So I share this story all the time because we have to believe and understand there's a duplicity in things. People are not just one monolith, right? So I lived down this dirt road, which I'm not trying to sound like those old stories, but it was literally a mile from the stop sign where the bus would pick you up. And I knew that every morning the sheriff would ride his car down to the stop sign to make sure I was not abducted because we lived near a truck stop. I knew also that I was not allowed to get in his car because I was Black, and he was a member of the Klan. So there was this mixture of values here that I was valuable enough to keep alive because he cared about me as a human being. But I lacked enough value to be able to get in the car if it was raining because I was a little Black child.
Wow.
And so that taught me early on, this is someone who's here to help, right? The helpers that we learned about if you were young enough to watch Mr. Rogers, but also understanding there's a sickness in that person that holds that position that thinks that I'm inferior. Now, on the converse to that, at some point during my life, my father ended up being on America's Most Wanted for charges that ended up being cleared up. But then my belief was, okay, the police are not good people because they're searching for someone who at the time was innocent. And then I'll now look at the position that I'm in. I literally had a conversation with an investor who has a number of spirit companies yesterday in Baltimore. And he talked about his experience and understanding that he could never go through Cheverly as a kid because he knew he would be stopped by the police. And there is not one African-American man that I've spoken to between the ages of 35 and 50 who've ever driven through my town who does not have a story being stopped by the police.
Oh, wow.
And so knowing the prolific racial profiling and, getting the data to show this is not anecdotal, this was happening, it colors how you look at police in general. My last point to that is I am the mother of a Black son. and he's 4 feet tall. He's probably going to end up being 6.5 feet tall. I'm 5'4". You know, he came out 24 inches. So I'm going to have a big black boy, right? And when I can't remember Elijah's name, but the poor child that was killed in Colorado, as soon as I heard his story, I thought, that's my son, because my son has autism. And so if he doesn't stop when you tell him to stop, it's not because he's being disrespectful. It's not because he doesn't respect the police. It's because he actually can't hear you. He's not paying you any attention. And so I thought to myself, what's one of the ways that I can keep somebody from killing my kid? And I don't think any parent should have to think about that.
Okay. So as far as growing up, I mean, I was taught to respect people in general, so it was no look down on any specific person of any category or for what they served or what their job was. But there was also some sort of like NWA attitude that me and people and my other children in my community grew up with, because the police officers were not welcoming. It was more of like, fear us. If you're bad, we're gonna be there and we're gonna take care of your situation, and not take care as in we're gonna help you, but take care of you'll be in trouble and you'll be sent to jail. So it's always a do good or you'll be in jail type of situation. So although I respected people in general and them as well, it was kind of like, okay, these people aren't necessarily my friends either. So it was still that kind of shift away from them. So for me, it was more of a avoid them type of thing. So you want to avoid the police, avoid being in contact with them, because if you do, they're not going to have anything in your favor. They won't be in your favor. They will be against you. So that's kind of how, that's what shaped my view on police officers. And that's how it is right now as well, too. You know, I feel like a lot of children, black children, we grow up with that type of, like I said, NWA type of attitude. You know, we don't like the police because we feel the police is going to do this and that to us at the same time. That's why I feel like there needs to be some sort of selflessness with police officers so that they can be looked at as people who serve and are people who are authority. Not that it's bad to look at them as someone in authority because of the position they hold, but just because we don't want someone to tell us what to do because they can do something to us. So we don't want a threat, but more of a push. It's fine. Like, we don't want to be threatened, like, if you don't follow our rules, if you don't do this and that, we can take your life or put you in a place where you won't have a life. But it's more of a, okay, don't do this and try not to do this, because the results and the consequences are not something that you're gonna like or will add any value to you. So that's what that's the way I see things now as well too. So that's why I always sort of like selflessness. Let's train them to be more of servers than just authority. Let's not create fear, but create love. It kind of sounds a little generic, but like, love, like let's be welcoming. Let's have officers be more welcoming to the people of the community. Let them be more, people of the community than people of the government.
Right. Yeah, and like even in like instances of like excessive use of force, with like even school resource officers, that's been like a surge lately. So I have like a couple questions for you guys, because a lot of people are petitioning for these SROs to like not be in schools anymore, or like to limit how many are in the schools. Do you guys think that would be effective? Or if not, what legal or ethical Okay, so my question is, what ethical and legal standards do you feel should be put in place to ensure the safety and security of our students?
Okay, I'm going to be so real. I know exactly the type of videos you're talking about. And I think the most shocking part was when I would see it happen at HBCUs, because I was like, yes. I thought this would be our safe space, to say. I feel like, it comes down to training, right? The way they're trained, the way, they're taught to deal with different situations and what's going on. I think it's all about just not getting frustrated and then using force. It seems that, if you do anything, if you're disrespectful or you take the wrong tone, or I mean, you shouldn't be using force, but you know, if it happens, I just wish it wasn't like, okay, now I'm going to put my hands on you and I have the right to do it. Kind of like what Harris was saying earlier, like for me, if I'm ever around the cops, I feel like I have to be so like the most perfect citizen, because if not, then it's like, are you going to use this to say you have the right to do something to me? I think that's something to think about.
Like a threat, like I was saying.
And I also feel like it's kind of like our human instinct to like, you know how people say like fight or flight, and we always are like, that's so champ, why are y'all saying that? But that's like really how it is. Like our human instinct most of the time is to like resist like whatever is like unsettling to us, making us uncomfortable. So I feel like that's most people's default, especially like if you're put in a position where you have no idea why you're being confronted, why are you being talked to this way, why are you being disrespected this way. There's always that sense of like, oh my gosh, like I don't know what's going on and I don't know what to do about it. So
that plays into the welcoming thing I was saying. If they don't, like, as a police officer, it's your approach as well. If you approach someone as a person, hello, how you doing, I'm here for this reason, what's going on, talk to them, using a certain technique of talking to people to solve a matter instead of trying to amplify the situation and then cause a conflict, which results in other things that we don't want to see, as blood being shed. If they had different alternatives to the way they approach situations, then there'll probably be more resolved situation than amplified conflicts.
So I think I would highlight just another side to this, which may sound controversial, but quite frankly, everything that has to do with the white supremacy and undertones of racial issues is tied to capitalism. And so the hardest part for us to accept, because I've actually worked side by side with folks, whether it's a school resource officer or an actual police officer, is it's a really terrible job. It's not a good job, right? So like you've got people who, and I say that on one hand, and on the other hand saying if you don't have a whole lot of opportunities and you don't have a college education and you want a pension and you want to be able to retire, it's an opportunity, right? Because there's not a whole lot of jobs where you can still retire at 50 or 55 and get a check. So if you need that opportunity because maybe nobody can afford college and this is the only way you take care of your family, it's a great opportunity. That's why you see a lot of the police officers in our area are actually from Pennsylvania or up north.
Oh my gosh.
Because it's an opportunity where they're making more money than they would ever be able to make doing anything else. So that the one side of that is that, right, you're getting medical insurance, you get benefits, and so there's those perks that go along with the job, sign-on bonuses. The other part to it is it's a terrible job. Even if you're a student resource officer, you're not getting paid like police officers are. So your wage is literally no more than what some of the students might be making if they're working, right? And yet you still have to vie for this respect. You still have your life on the line. You don't know if you're going to go home to your family. And so you are always also walking in fear. The biggest thing that we can do to impact student resource officers or police officers is actually in the human resources realm. Be careful who you hire.
Come on
There's
now.
so many police officers where I think to myself, how in the world did you pass the psych eval?
Right.
And really it's
Their
because we don't have
qualifications.
enough qualified officers, so we start taking in the dregs. So I'm not saying that to excuse poor behavior or say that we shouldn't have standards for those positions, but they're really just not great jobs. And when I look at how do I make that better, the first thing I'm going to do is pay you more. If I pay you more, then you have a lot more to lose. When I used to do training, I actually used to do domestic violence, dating violence training with the police officers that are on Howard University campus. And when I did that, I also talked to them about what they could lose if they don't respond to domestic violence cases, because you can be personally sued as an officer. And that really, really resonated with folks to know that, hey, I can't send my kid to college if I don't do my job, right? So there has to be some responsibilities that are associated with the position where you can be held accountable. When you look at what was the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights, which has now been impacted by Maryland law, there was a time when there was no accountability for an officer. Like you could just you could do whatever you wanted to do, and it was left up to a board to decide if you kept your job. And most often, even the worst actors, the worst officers, kept their jobs.
Oh, wow.
So the benefits to some of those changes that came after George Floyd is that we looked at our law enforcement Bill of Rights and made it so that more officers could be held accountable.
Oh, I did want to touch on that because I know a lot of the times when something happens with a cop and it's on the news, you end up going into their background and discovering that they may have had a number of times they were reprimanded or people called in about them and nothing was done, and then this incident happens and now it's like, well, if the proper, whoever's in charge, proper authorities had dealt with these minor incidents, maybe this major one could have been avoided. So I think that, it's awful that people had to die for these systems to be put in place, but if it can prevent future deaths, then there's something to look at there.
Definitely. I also wanted to touch base. I don't think we told the audience, but Mayor Kayce is one of the first Black women elected as mayor for Cheverly, Maryland. That is a big
Congratulations.
deal.
Yes.
And even just hearing your story about how so many Black people that come out of Cheverly have the same story about dealing with racism within the community, I think you coming into office is really going to change things up. And so, reflecting on your time in law enforcement, what changes did you see, or did you ever see officers abuse their power, and if so, how did that make you feel?
Well, my initial response would be 100%, but I don't want anybody coming to ask me a question. I saw officers that I would not call it abuse of power. Someone else probably would. But I saw officers who would tell you their story about how they became officers. And they became officers because they were kids who were heading in the wrong direction. And some police officer jacked them up and threw them on a car. Oh. Right? So that sounds awful. But that was the first impression of law enforcement. It was also the first time anybody cared anything about them. Enough to say what you're doing is not appropriate, change your life around, get into, the cadet program. And so,
Right.
those are not tactics that I would suggest people use, but it was a way to have an impact on particularly young Black men. I was in an office with 32 men, literally not one female detective. And all of their stories were centered around some officer having really what should have been a negative experience, but made them think, hey, I think I could do this job. So that's not to say it's okay to jack up people and throw them on cars, right? But I do think that there's a lot of abuse of power. Now, I also would say this because I think it's important. It gets back to your point about what we find in people's jackets when we go to internal affairs. The police department, quite frankly, is the most toxic work environment I have ever been in.
Oh, wow.
It is 100% unhealthy. There's so many problems that are in that environment that it's really hard for people to function in a healthy way. Some of the examples include you can take the sergeant's exam without ever taking the detective's test, right?
Oh, wow.
So you could be a sergeant and never have actually been a detective, or depending upon the police department and what their requirements are, depends on where you are, right? So you could have a position of power and never have done the job. That's not always a problem, right? I always point to the NFL. There's 32 NFL teams. Out of all of the coaches you see, only 2 of them have actually ever played football. So you don't have to do the job to know how to coach people or teach people on how to lead or do the job, right? But it helps for people to have respect for you if you got some skin in the game.
Right.
So,
Just to go back on what you said about how some people got into the career because they were jacked up. I actually seen something that said that shows like Beyond Scared Straight don't actually help violence. It doesn't change those children from actually doing the things that they do. So I kind of contradict with that idea. I do believe though that officers probably do provide the message that they send, or some probably do talk with the children they do arrest and probably do give them a message that kind of touches them. That is very much possible. But in that situation of coming in contact with children, like I said, is the approach. Most officers don't have that approach. Maybe they don't talk with children often, and maybe they don't have children or young people that they come in contact with. throughout their lives often, so they don't know how to talk to children. So that may be another reason, but I feel like that should be part of their training, part of their qualifications when it comes to employment. I seen that you required your chief of police to train at the African American History and Culture Museum.
Oh, wow.
And I like that. That's I never necessarily thought about that as being part of training, but that's actually a good solution to get people notified and get them aware of the history of Black culture before they go into these communities and start patrolling them, you know, because the history of policing is the slave patrols. So though I feel like the goal should be moving from that to people of the community, overseers of the community, trying to protect the community from outsiders or trying to find ways to better the community from the inside and not from the outside, you know. Changing policing from a job to, you know, to something like a being, you know, like hiring people in the community to take care of it, people who have lived, people who have been children there, people who know that community to be able to take care of it, because now they can have their future generations live and grow in the community, and it could become a place where people can stay and not feel like they have to leave because of what's going on, but they can change it. So if most of us had that mindset, then, you know, the places that we're in right now would probably be better than it is right now.
So what you're describing is not new. This is literally community policing, which most people don't give credit to where credit is due. Marion Barry brought that here. His thought was, your police officer should be the guy that you've grown up with on the corner. You've seen him, so you can trust him, you know who he is, and you feel comfortable sharing whether or not you saw somebody get murdered or robbed, because you know that person. So that's a 30-year-old idea that he said he wanted to implement in the District of Columbia. The problem is, when you have a job that's not a good job, I can't get the guy on the corner to be the police officer, right? It's too easy for him to get a federal government position or something else where maybe he's in tech or whatever. If he's making six figures at 22 years old, I can't afford that police officer. So now I have to outsource this job to people who will do it. And those are people from other areas that don't know anything about the community. I don't know if any of you all were here or remembered when my old chief many moons ago, Kathleen Lanier, ended up being sued because she literally said they were not going to allow anybody in or out of the Trinidad community in D.C. You know, one might argue this is completely illegal. If you didn't live there, you couldn't even go there. I went to church in the Trinidad area, and I could go to church. But the thought behind someone who has never actually lived in that community policing it and telling you might not be able to go home, how does that impact community when that's lifted? Are you going to trust those entities? Are you going to share with them what you saw? Absolutely not. So then you actually create the distrust. And then when you do that, you make it impossible for the criminal justice system to work. The only way the criminal justice system works is if people like me and you feel comfortable enough to say, yes, I saw so-and-so did this. Because we are the ones that know it before anybody else do.
But like you said policing is a bad job, but then you also said it needs to be, policing is a need.
It is a need.
So how can we get to the middle where it's no more? That's why I feel like there needs to be a middle where it's no more a job and it's more of just older people of the community taking care of it. You know, no more police maybe, but like more of community overseers. So we don't have the patrols, the people with the guns, the people putting fear into the young people's mind that are living in the community. So more people who take care of it.
Here's the reality. We live in there's no better way for me to say it. I'm the daughter of a Baptist preacher. We live in a fallen world. And when you live in a fallen world, there are bad actors. So we can't just have people who look out for the community, who love us and just care about us. We can't just have the community policing piece without the policing piece. Because the same kid you're talking about that the officers don't talk to, when Prince George's County Hospital used to be open in Cheverly, Maryland, I had a special team from the Metropolitan Police Department where we had a guy that we literally called 50 Cent because he'd been shot 9 times.
Oh my God.
Wow.
He'd been shot 9 times. He was 16 years old.
Oh my gosh.
The first time
No
I ever
way.
worked with him was when he was 16. His mother was on drugs. And I was like, I can find you housing. I can get you to Sasha Bruce. I can help you turn your life around if you trust me. And he trusted me.
Okay.
3 weeks later, he went and killed somebody.
Okay.
So
Oh my gosh.
that intercession, that one moment that he had with somebody who cared about him and cared about their job enough to work with him, could not combat the years of what he spent at home. So even though I have people in the community like me or other officers that might have touched this guy, right, in a positive way, I still can't fight what happens when he goes home. And because I can't fight what happens when he goes home, I still need an officer who does have a gun.
The thing is, now we're going more from policing to violence, right? I feel like, well, violence is a whole crime. Crime in a way is inevitable because it's a rebellion against the American system that keeps the poor and the wealthy richer. So there's a different approach, in my belief, for that situation. You know, if we were to help the poor, it's different than having policing around, because I mean, if you were to try to stop violence, I don't think police stop violence is what I'm trying to say. Policing doesn't necessarily stop violence. It puts fear, and it might have some people acting, you know, for a certain amount of time, but it won't necessarily stop the violence that we're looking for to end.
I would like to jump in real quick. In one of my classes, the question that was probed was like, why is violence so prominent in Black communities? And it made me sit back and be like, hold on, like, what do you mean by that? But I agree with you. Looking into, like, I think we can all agree that this country is built off of a racist system, right? So if we're looking at institutionalized racism, environmental racism, how we're, like, placed on the map. And this is, like, an arguable thing, but I truly believe, like, the violence that is ensuing within our community, specifically the Black community, is because of the lack of resources put in place to protect us. You're right. Like, I believe that's the case.
I do want to jump in actually because I'm taking an African American history class, and it starts from 1877, and we go through it, and it talked about how, you know, after slaves were released, and they were kind of free, but they weren't in a sense, because they had these black codes they established. And with these black codes, it was a number of things you could be arrested for. If you didn't work for a white man, you couldn't prove it. If you didn't have your papers, as I say, it was a plethora of things. And one main thing they would do is they would arrest Black people for like petty crimes or stuff like white people aren't getting arrested for, and they would send them to jail. And if they couldn't pay their fee, a white man would come and he would say, I'm going to pay this off for you, but now you work for me, right?
Wow.
They work for them. After that, most Black people couldn't read or write at this point. Or if the ones that could, they'd be like, hey, it's going to take you this many years to work it off. These years pass. They're like, okay, am I free now? No, you still got more years to work.
Wow.
Next thing you know, it's their kids working. And then there's their kids' kids, and there's kids' And that was how they were able to continue slavery without calling it slavery.
Wow.
And we learned in this class that a lot of people, Black people, were looked at as criminals in the beginning. You know, how it started was because of this over-policing. So I think when we look at it like that, we're like, okay, we definitely were given, like, I don't know the best way to say it, but things were unfair from the jump for us.
So kind of going backwards.
Right. So it's like, okay, yes, I think we can argue there's a crime problem within the Black community, but where did it center from?
Yeah,
Is it really much worse than other communities, or this is like a spotlight on us? Have we been put in an unfair position? Which I think is something to really talk about. Like, the history of policing, I think, is a main reason why a lot of people don't trust the system, and then the continued actions within the system.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I even had the opportunity before this to go around the school and ask students, like, questions pertaining to policing in America. Now, these questions weren't, like, leading questions. They were kind of more so open-ended questions, like, in terms of, like, the recent rise of, like, crime, like, that's being, like, publicized, or, like, policing. So I asked them a question about, due to a rise in, like, police violence, being publicized now, has your view on the police changed? Now, I asked different people from different backgrounds. We have a large demographic of people here that come from different walks of life. So I had the opportunity to ask the Black men, the white men, white women, Black women, Hispanic women, and I noticed that there was like a consistency. And when I posed that question to Black men, they were more quick to want to answer the question and state their their case, but like the white students, they were kind of adamant, and I was like, how can I like pose this question in a way that doesn't make them fear like the backlash of having an opinion, because everybody's entitled to it.
Right.
But I did notice a consistency that a lot of people said I didn't even trust the police to begin with. Even white students said that. They were like, I never really liked them to begin with.
Wow.
And we have to question the why. So then I asked them, do you think social media has desensitized you to violence? Because if we're looking at the rise of like cases in which black unarmed men and women are being targeted by the police, we also have to acknowledge the fact that we have more access to resources and technology that we did not have before. And so now it's coming to the light, it's being publicized more because we have the opportunity to see it, but at the same time it's kind of in a way desensitizing us to violence. Do you guys feel that it's the case?
Well, I know personally for me, sometimes I just have to take a step back from social media because it's like every other week it's someone dying. And to be honest, it's terrifying. I started to think to myself, like, man, if I were to get in a situation with the cops and it goes wrong, it goes left, how many things do I want to like do with my life now? Because God forbid, I don't know like if I'm going to get in a bad situation 5 years from now, 4 years from now, whatever it may be, 10 years from now, and then I'm gone, right? And I think the fear is also like you're kind of forgetting. There's so many people, teens, older people who are getting killed by the cops. It's like you can't keep up. Not everyone can tell their stories. Some people get like highlighted, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, but not everybody.
We also have to ask ourselves, when we look at social media and what's going on, is it a trend where people are just trying to post things, or is it
performative activism?
Is it an actual awareness where we're trying to let each other know about this and that?
Right.
Because ask yourself, when you do see these videos, what do you do afterwards? Do you go and do your own research about what's going on and see how you can help yourself and protect yourself? Or do you just repost it and continue
With your day.
the trend of just talking about it instead of actually doing anything about it?
So for that point, I would actually say that's a great moment to do a call to action, particularly for students who are old enough to vote. Because a lot of it is not necessarily performative. It's just like it's a feeling of helplessness. What can I do, right?
True.
And one of the things you can do is vote and be vocal about types of legislation you want to move forward. We could not get our Congress to support an anti-lynching bill in 2020. Like we could not get.
Yeah.
It took us years for them to finally say, no, you should not lynch people. As late as just a couple years ago. So having the voice around that is really critical to say, no, I don't care if I'm 18, I'm old enough to vote.
Right.
And this is what I'm sending my congressman, or this is what I'm sending my senator. I think that we are desensitized, but it's also so important because the reality is these murders were always happening. We just didn't have phones with cameras.
Nothing new.
We had no idea how prevalent it was everywhere. And so in so many ways, I mean, I always give people a mathematical equation. If you got 4 million slaves, 300,000, non-slave holders and free people, out of 4 million slaves, how does that turn into a population of just 13 million people 100 years later? The only way that happens is genocide. You have to keep killing them in order for the numbers to not actually reflect that those 4 million people procreated and made 375 million people, because that's how many people are in America. So you have to purposefully create legislation, laws, policies that kill black people. And so I think it is important to highlight how often black people get killed.
Yes.
We
And then
couldn't
put the drugs into our communities as well,
Oh yeah.
so we can kill each other.
Absolutely. So
That right there.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
I know. I wanted to say something quick on that actually. Learning about like the number of just lynchings in general that were going on, like kind of like right after slavery around that time, and the way they would take postcards, they would take photos and they would send postcards of black people being lynched consistently. And it's like stuff like that you learn it and it just kind of sits with you. So I think going off Harris's point, maybe some people are performative, but sometimes, especially as a black person, you look at it and you're like, I'm exhausted. I don't know what to do besides vote and then like kind of spread the word, but I'm not at the top of the, I'm not at the top of the, what is it? It's like top of like
food chain.
Yeah, basically it's like in society, like black people are kind of like at the bottom,
Yeah,
and
like feel like your word has no say or
Right.
no power.
Mind you, there is social media, which I think does change the game to an extent, but it's difficult.
Definitely. So, do you guys think that there will ever be a day where the Black community and the police department have no animosity?
No.
No animosity.
I don't think it'll happen, only because the history, unless people are like, we're going to acknowledge this and we're going to try to actively like switch things up and change things around, there's always going to be somebody who was like, I don't like cops and I'll never like them. And it's as simple as that, because if you don't acknowledge what was done, if they don't like sit here and acknowledge the history, I think people are always going to say something about them.
I have to one just because the only way I could live and survive is if I have hope.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to believe that that there's a future where the police just do their job and don't kill Black people. For even if you commit a crime, guess what? You're allowed to go home alive, right?
Yeah.
So I have to believe that. What I was really heartened by was the global response
That
to
is
George
true.
Floyd being murdered, because there's plenty of colonialist holding countries and continents that spoke up against what happened to George Floyd, because we witnessed a murder, right? Every last human being witnessed a murder on national television, international television. What I was disappointed by was sort of the international response from entities like the United Nations, because at some point someone needs to hold America accountable
Right.
for what it has done to
That's
Black
a good
people.
point right there.
And without getting the partnership and the support from our international neighbors, it's kind of like, how dare we ever accuse, Ukraine or Russia of international crimes when we have an ongoing international crime.
It's hypocritical.
Yeah.
It definitely is.
So I have to hold on to hope. Otherwise, faith isn't real.
True.
Yeah.
But part of that has to do with us too. If you become part of the police department, if you become what Harris is talking about, which is the community-based policing, where it's the person you knew or you grew up with, you have the ability to change something from within. And that's something that I learned in being the mayor. I had plenty of complaints about the fact that we didn't have a fence at Boyd Park. And for 2 years, I said, what do I need to do to get a fence at Boyd Park as a regular layperson? And then I ran for office, right? And I realized all I needed is a vote. I just need one vote to get a fence at Boyd Park. Guess what? There's a fence at Boyd Park.
Hey.
And so you have
Correct.
to have a seat at the table.
That is
You have
true.
to find your seat at the table, whatever table that is, and then start affecting change. And when you do that, then it bursts more hope and more faith to believe that things can change.
Wow. And so, in wrapping up, last question is, what additional community and or political resources do you think need to be established in order to have like a safer approach to policing? And this isn't just for law enforcement. Like you said, policing is a hard job too, because there's bad apples within the department and there's bad apples within the community as well. So how can we like make a safer approach to policing from law enforcement to the community?
Yeah, I would say that literally everything we need, we already have, believe it or not. We have really great laws on the books, believe it or not. We don't use them. If we were to say, let's just take for the police department side, if you know that you are not 100% able to do your job today, don't come do it. If you interacted with somebody and you had a bad day with your spouse or whatever, don't come to work, because you might take that out. That we've taught you how to channel your aggression when you're working with people that you might have to arrest. Don't come to work today, and we're not going to charge you for that. We're not going to penalize you for that. If we made the police department transparent with somebody could say, I'm having some real mental health issues. Okay, yeah, you get desk duty, but you still get paid. Because everything about being a police officer is tied to being able to carry a gun. And if I can safely take that gun from you and you don't lose your livelihood, then we've preserved 2 lives. One, you don't end up in jail or in a court, and whoever it is you might have had a negative interaction with gets to go home today. That's the first thing. The second thing is exactly how we do training. Part of the requirement that I made for my police officers that they do that training was because the first chief of police that was under me literally admitted he didn't understand racism.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
And so if he shares that with me, I have an obligation to say thank you for your transparency. What do I need to do to help try to make sure this is ingratiated in what you're thinking about? Because people don't think about it. The silhouette that officers train on to shoot is a black person.
Yes, I heard about that.
So
That's
if
crazy.
all of
Sick.
the underlying
plays into the mind,
undertones,
too.
yeah, if everything you learn about dealing with criminals is that they are minorities, then you are more likely to have a negative experience with a minority.
100%.
Yeah. So we have to deal with the training. We have to deal with the services that we provide for the actual employees themselves. And then we have to deal with the public. When people talk about defund police, they're not saying get rid of the police department. They're saying we need more social workers. We need more mental health counselors. There was some research done for a police department in Texas. They spent $3 million on 2 people that kept calling the police department when really they had mental health problems. And we just thank God those people didn't end up killed, because it was only a matter of time before the police department just said, you know, they're a menace to society, and did a different result. There was a different result. So we have to really concentrate our resources on making sure we take care of people and their mental health and all that they need. If we go back to 50 Cent, he had to go home to a mom who was on drugs with no food. And so, you know, it was inevitable that one day he would end up in a system that he would succumb to, right? So it's multifolded, multifaceted in how we address that issue.
Wow, well said. Well, thank you so much for joining us
Yes,
today.
thank
I
you.
learned so much. How about you guys?
Yeah,
For
great
sure.
Definitely.
For
conversation.
sure.
Okay, and one last thing, we have a gift for you
Little
as you
surprise.
depart.
Can I get a drum roll, please?
Oh, this for me? Oh, y'all don't know I work out. This is great.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well,
I get to represent PG.
this concludes the.
So when you doing your workout on
I'm
Cheverly,
gonna clip it. Yeah.
everyone in PG can see. You know,
Oh my God. Thank you.
before PGCC.
Is it under $20? Because I ethically can't take it.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, guys. So this concludes the last I'm sorry. Wrap it up. Hold on. 3, 2, 1. All right, guys. So this concludes this episode of PGCC Perspective. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our special guests. Thank you to my co-hosts Harris and Alexis. Be sure to follow us on our social media pages on our Instagram at Owl Newspaper. And dude, okay, I got to do it again. Sorry. Okay, this wraps up this week's episode of PGCC Perspective. I'm so glad you guys joined our conversation to the very end. Thank you to our special guests. Thank you to my co-hosts. And I cannot wait to see you guys next Thursday. Be sure to tune in and follow us on our social media pages on Instagram at Owl Newspaper. And we will see you guys later. What? Do it again. Okay, I'm so sorry.
Wait,
I'm sorry, I'm going to do it again real quick.
wait, when do I play the music?
All right, guys, so this wraps up our very oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, y'all. Okay, guys, so this wraps up this week's episode of PGCC Perspective. Thank you guys so much for staying to the very end. Thank you to our special guests.
Yes.
Thank you to my co-hosts. Thank you guys for this discussion. I hope you guys learned something. Shout out to the Humanities Department for granting us this amazing platform to share our voice with the community. Shout out to Mr. Bobby, our
Mr.
new
Bobby.
best friend. And be sure to follow us on our Instagram pages at Owl Newspaper, and we will see you guys later.
Drama, we got it. If you like sports, yeah, we got it. You like politics, promise we got it. Report everything hot at this college. PG News, yeah, right off the press. Reporters and filmers, PG got the best. Information that you need is reported. Make sure y'all tune in for what's happening.